export, the U.S. Commerce Department is hiking anti-dumping duties on Canadian softwood lumber to 20.56%.
Why these rates change. That's why this rate has gone up so dramatically, which is going to be very punishing to all Canadian companies.
Recovered late morning. Lumber futures are, of course, higher given the news on the 25% tariff on Canada. There is already a 14.5% duty on Canadian lumber.
Imagine this. You've been saving for years, dreaming of owning your first home. You finally find it, the perfect little place, just within reach. You sit down with your lender, crunch the numbers, and you're told you can afford it. But the very next week, the price of that home jumps by $20,000, not because of luxury upgrades, not because of a booming market, but because America just lost its biggest source of lumber overnight. $4 billion in trade, gone like that. This isn't just another headline buried in the business section.
Unjustified tariff, you can expect us to fight against it. And you can expect us to take specific steps to protect those workers.
This is a trade war that's quietly ripping into the heart of the American dream. A war fought not with tanks or missiles, but with tariffs, shipments, and silent retaliation. And if you think this is only about wood, you're about to see why lumber has just become the weapon that could shake America's economy to its core. One trade war. $4 billion evaporated overnight. Canada slammed the brakes and cut off all lumber exports to the United States. The impact wasn't gradual, it was instant. Housing markets froze. Construction projects stalled.
Says it has a plan to fight back against new U.S. duties on Canadian lumber.
The cost of basic building materials shot through the roof. Donald Trump exploded on social media, calling it economic blackmail. His words lit up headlines around the world. But behind the outrage was something far scarier, a crisis spiraling out of control. And here's the big question. If this is only the opening move, how much more can America lose before someone finally blinks? Why lumber matters more than you think. Lumber isn't glamorous. It doesn't sparkle like gold or command headlines like oil. But without it, you can forget about building almost anything in America. Houses, apartments, offices, schools. Every wall, every floor, every roof depends on it. And here's the kicker. 75% of America's lumber supply doesn't even come from inside the U.S. It comes straight from Canada. For decades, it was a perfect partnership. Canada has the forests, the mills, and the infrastructure to deliver high-quality, affordable softwood lumber. The U.S. had the demand. Together, they built one of the most reliable supply chains in the world. But then, in the blink of an eye, that relationship cracked. One day, the trucks were rolling in. The next, the flow of lumber was gone, just like someone flipping a switch. The spark that lit the fuse. So why did Canada pull the plug? The answer lies in copper. When Washington slapped a massive 50% tariff on copper imports, it was the last straw. Canada had already been hit by tariffs on aluminum and steel. This was insult stacked on injury. Their officials didn't just want to push back, they wanted to hit America where it hurt the most. And lumber was the bullseye. By cutting exports, Canada aimed right at the heart of the U.S. housing market. And the hardest hit? First-time home buyers and small contractors, the very people who could least afford it. The real-world fallout. Think about this. You plan to buy a home at $250,000. Overnight, that price jumps to $270,000. For most families, scraping together every last dollar for a down payment, that's a deal breaker. It wasn't just buyers. Renovations, repairs, even small backyard projects suddenly doubled in cost. Families trying to fix a leaky roof were stuck waiting, or paying thousands more than expected. Within a single quarter, the U.S. lost $4.2 billion worth of affordable lumber. Prices on domestic wood shot up by over 30%. Builders scrambled, buyers panicked. Major housing giants like Lennar and D.R. Horton slammed the brakes on projects coast to coast. Communities across the Midwest, the South, and the East Coast saw half-finished homes sitting idle waiting for materials that might not arrive for months. For those projects that did continue, the math was brutal. Every new home now costs $20,000 more, minimum. The human toll. That $20,000 might not sound like much to the people writing policies in Washington. but to a young family in Ohio or Texas, it's the difference between getting the keys to their first home or walking away heartbroken. Mortgage lenders reported buyers backing out. Contractors, especially family-run ones, were drowning. Unlike mega corporations, they couldn't buy lumber in bulk or hedge against sudden spikes. They had signed contracts months earlier, and now every single nail they hammered was costing them money. Some canceled contracts, others refunded deposits. Many had no choice but to lay off workers. What should have been a booming construction season turned into survival mode. The bigger picture. And here's what makes this story bigger than just houses. Canada didn't make this move lightly. Behind closed doors, they had been preparing for months, quietly building trade routes to Asia, locking in deals with China, South Korea, and Japan. So when Washington dropped that copper tariff, Canada wasn't caught off guard. They were ready. Lumber that once flowed into the U.S. began shipping out to Asia instead. In Canadian ports like Vancouver and Montreal, sawmills worked overtime, not for Seattle or Los Angeles, but for Shanghai and Busan. The message was loud and clear. America is no longer the priority customer. Now, America's construction industry is on life support. Builders are in crisis. Families are being priced out, and politicians in Washington are screaming at each other, trying to decide whether to fight harder or back down before it's too late. But here's the question that matters most. Is this just a short-term trade skirmish, or the beginning of a long-term shift that could permanently change how America builds its homes? Stick around, because in Phase 2, we're diving into the political firestorm, the chaos on Capitol Hill, and the global ripple effects of this lumber war. These representatives are urging Washington to act fast before the damage becomes permanent. But finding common ground in Congress is never easy. The partisan divide is deep, and every single day of delay is making things worse. Some lawmakers now fear this fight could drag America toward a full-blown recession. Inflation is creeping higher. Mortgage rates remain punishingly high. Consumer confidence is sinking. And for many, this isn't just about one tariff, it's about the bigger picture. Because when the housing market stalls, it drags down everything else: retail, banking, even jobs that have nothing to do with construction. Behind the scenes, lobbyists are swarming Washington. Home builders, auto giants, manufacturers, they're all begging for relief. They warn that if no deal is reached soon, prices will keep rising, supply chains will keep breaking, and small businesses will keep closing. The White House insists the copper tariff is a matter of national security, but critics argue it looks more like political theater. Meanwhile, workers, families, and companies are left stranded in the crossfire. Canada's pivot to Asia. While Washington scrambles, Canada isn't waiting. In fact, they've moved faster than anyone imagined. Trade teams rushed into negotiations with Japan, South Korea, and China, locking in billions of dollars in new lumber orders. Provinces like British Columbia upgraded ports. Rail lines were rerouted east. Sawmills received grants to boost production. The goal? Not just to replace lost American demand, but to future-proof Canada's economy by tying itself to Asia's booming markets. For Canadian officials, this isn't punishment, it's liberation. By relying less on the U.S., they gain independence and protection from Washington's trade games. And once those long-term contracts are signed, there's no easy way for America to win that business back. Everyday Americans pay the price. But while politicians posture, ordinary people are hurting the most. Prices on lumber. Made products, furniture, cabinets, fences, even school desks are climbing quietly but steadily. A chair that once cost $120 now costs $160. Plywood that was $45 is suddenly $70. Multiply that across every project, every repair, every home purchase, and the squeeze becomes impossible to ignore. For families, what used to be a necessary repair, like fixing a roof, has now become a luxury. Inflation is back in their daily lives, but wages aren't rising to match. Is there a way out? Behind closed doors, moderates in Congress are floating a desperate idea: lift the 50% copper tariff in exchange for restoring lumber flows. A temporary trade swap to stop the bleeding. Canada hasn't rejected it outright, but they demand respect and equality in negotiations. The trust between these two allies is broken, and time is running out. Because if Canada cements its pivot to Asia, America won't just lose lumber, it could lose an economic partner it's relied on for generations. So here's the question: is this the start of a permanent shift in global power, or can the US and Canada rebuild the trust before it's too late? If you've made it this far, you're ahead of 99% of people who still think this is just about wood. But you know better. It's about the future of our homes, our economy, and maybe even the balance of global trade. And here's the thing: this story is only going to get wilder. So if you want to know what happens next, who wins, who loses, and how it could affect your wallet, hit that subscribe button right now. Because in my next video, I'm going to expose the hidden industries about to get dragged into this trade war. And trust me, you don't want to miss it.